Hi everybody, and welcome to our presentation, Authentic and Emerging, Understanding the Context of Your School Design Project. We really appreciate your time and energy during this virtual A4 Elite Association Days conference. Our presentation was originally meant to be a panel discussion followed by an interactive workshop. And so that we don't completely lose the intention of how we set this up, what we did was formatted the presentation to include a short introduction of the topics and central project to be discussed, followed by the panel discussion and concluding with a self-directed workshop in the form of a short survey. At the end of the presentation, we're hoping you're going to be better able to strategically investigate the authentic and emerging contexts of your district, your school, your project, and then articulate, prioritize, and equitably apply those contexts. We're also hoping you'll be better able to recognize and cyclically apply those contexts as new best practices come out in education and educational design. Our panel today is made up of Executive Director Chuck Jackson and Chief Academic Officer Nyamka Long of Creative Minds International Public Charter School and Principal Stephen Orlansky of Newman Architects. I'm Rachel Pampel, an educational planner from Newman Architects, and I will be introducing our background information and then moderating the panel. We're going to start by reviewing a few of our core beliefs, tools, and resources around how Newman approaches K-12 design, and then we're going to dive into an overview of the Creative Minds renovation project that we recently completed with Chuck and Nyamka. So to start an education design project, we always start with the basics, defining our terms. What is a learning environment and what is a good learning environment are key to clarify with your team early on in the design process. We believe that a good learning environment is one that takes into account authentic and emerging contexts. This is unique to every situation and is a carefully developed blend of a project's immediate needs and larger scale best practices. So what we mean by authentic is true to the practical situation and goals of a project. By emerging, we mean a project has to be open to change and self-motivated to grow. And by context, we mean the holistic setting of the learning process. To find these authentic and emerging contexts, we're going to be looking at the 6 perspectives of the learning environment and the 10 characteristics of a good learning environment. So the 6 perspectives of the learning environment is a scaffold of discovery of the authentic and emerging context of a project. It looks at 6 overlapping factors in a school design from a range of scales. The perspectives are mental and ideal, community and reach, physical and architectural, functional and operational, users and roles, and time and dynamic. Each perspective encourages us to ask key and defining questions about a project's context. So how do we think about and in the learning environment? How do we physically interact with and in the learning environment? Who are the individuals that are in our learning environment and how do they interact? Where is the learning environment located from all perspectives? What are the meta processes and goals of the learning environment? And when is the learning environment from all perspectives and how will it change? The 10 characteristics of a good learning environment are our data-driven global best practices that we've developed from a wide range of academic and practice-based resources. The characteristics are activity, adaptability, atmosphere, community, collaboration, emerging contexts, nature, orientation, pedagogy, and accessibility. This list is used as a guide early in the design process to set goals and priorities for the built learning environment, as well as the design process itself. All learning environments don't necessarily have all of these characteristics, but they are what is seen consistently as part of a holistic good learning environment in the research that we've looked at. So we're going to be using the Creative Minds International renovation project as the core project during our panel discussion. This renovation included a 6,000 square foot renovation in a historic federal building in Washington, D.C. The program was to develop classrooms, resource rooms, and a central learning commons that spanned the entirety of the building's ground floor, as well as pursuing targeted safety and security improvements throughout the building. Along with these tangible goals, we also worked to define a design vision for the future of the school. So as part of that process, we developed what we called a scope and priorities summary. Working with the core planning group, we collaboratively developed both the scope of the work to be implemented immediately and the scope of the work that was envisioned for the future. So after developing the scope for each floor of the building, we developed a list of opportunities presented and constraints inherent to each item. And then we prioritized each item on the list based on a balance of what was most important and what was most feasible for a limited schedule and budget. This scope and priorities in hand, we worked through a community engagement process consisting of several in-person meetings, digital surveys, and in-person questionnaires with students, staff, and teachers to determine the design values and goals of each group. The design team then consolidated these findings from the engagement into an executive summary that was presented at an academic and operational team design charrette. For this design charrette, the design team facilitated a day-long event with the school leadership where we revisited the scope and priority summaries, the community engagement executive summary, and then dived into a discussion around curriculum and space design. Key to this process was several passes at the core question of what is a good learning environment? And we started with what is a learning environment and then moved on to what is a good learning environment for CMI, for Creative Minds. So remembering again that what is a good learning environment is a unique answer to every situation. The findings from this design charrette were then used to fine-tune the scope and priority summary and led directly to the design guidelines for the project. These 4 design guidelines were collaboratively developed throughout the early parts of the design process and defined the design moves in the floors, ceilings, and walls of the spaces to be renovated. So these guidelines are reinforcing activity zones through FF&E and interior finishes, domesticating the learning environment, using line and plane to delineate and activate flexible environments, and using color and materials to advance wayfinding and orientation. So we consider this project really to be a prime example of how effective community engagement and values-driven design processes can yield big results even on a tight budget. And so we're just going to take a quick look at some before and after slides before diving into the panel discussion. So here you can see the before and after of the core of the learning commons. And here you see the transformation of the classroom spaces. This is the entrance lobby and primary community space within the ground floor commons. And so now we're going to move to the panel discussion with our 3 panelists. We have 4 main questions that we're going to structure the dialogue. And I'm going to start with letting the panelists introduce themselves as to get us going. So Stephen, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. I'm Stephen Orlansky, a principal with Newman Architects, and I've had the privilege of being involved in the design of schools now for over 20 years. I work with public school districts, with independent and charter schools like Creative Minds, as well as with institutions of higher education. One of the great benefits of being involved in school design is that it supports my personal aspiration to be a lifelong learner. And from no one do I learn more than from communities that care. So community engagement is a passion of mine and one of the great joys and fulfillments of being involved in this field.
Thanks, Stephen. You want to do Chuck and then Nyamka?
Thanks, Rachel. Hey, Stephen, it's good to see you. We're really excited as a school to be involved in this project. We really enjoyed working with you all at Newman. So I am a recovering attorney. So I practiced law for many years. And then about 15 years ago, I woke up and realized that education was a better solution to problems. So I've been in education for over 15 years, been here at Creative Mind for a little over 2 years. In all that experience, I've started a school, I've closed a school, I've renovated several schools. I built 1 new school building. I was also at DCPS as a deputy chief of operations for a while before I came back into charters. And I was very excited to work with Newman on this project. And I'm sitting in one of the spaces right now. It's beautiful. And we look forward to sharing our experience with you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Nyamka Long, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Creative Minds. And we were excited to partner with Newman to design this very beautiful space for our students. I have been working in education for over the past 15 years and worked in various settings, public, charter, private. And the thing that I love about it is that in all those different settings, you know, kids always bring such excitement and love of learning to an environment. And so as we kind of think about designing environments, we want to kind of take what students bring in and also set the settings up to be really an integral part of their learning experience. So that's something that is always front of mind as I'm always looking to do what can we do to kind of support students learning, and just instilling that growth mindset in them that they're lifelong learners. So we're just excited about this opportunity to answer some questions, and look forward to diving in.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. You did a much better job introducing yourselves than I would have. It would have been dry. So the way that we've set the panel up is the reason that we gave you the introduction to the Creative Minds project is it's obviously the one that we have the most familiarity with, but we're also going to be looking for our panel to give us some background on their other experiences, how they contrasted, how they compared to this specific project and what its authentic and emerging contexts were. So our first question for the panel is what was most surprising to you during your school design processes? And like I said, this is a question about the CMI project, the Creative Minds project, obviously, but also about any other project that it might connect to in your mind because it's so different or because it's so similar. Chuck, you want to start us off?
Yeah, thanks. As I mentioned in my intro, I have been involved in renovating other schools and building brand new buildings. And I think the key difference in this experience for me was the level of engagement in the process and the level of engagement of the community. So certainly when I was at central office at DCPS, it was definitely a top-down experience. It was, this is an old school, we're deciding to renovate it and we will select the architect and you will enjoy it, teachers, students, and all that. And what I really liked here, and one of the things I really like about Creative Minds and why I think we had such a strong partnership with Newman, was it was more of a bottom-up experience. Those guiding questions, the elements, you really did a nice job of facilitating the process where now people walk in here and say, oh, I remember when we picked that. Oh, yeah, I remember we decided to paint that wall that color. And I think that made a big difference. The other thing that I was really impressed by in this process was we are in a historic building. So there's a lot of hoops we have to jump through with SHPO and with our friends at Department of Defense and all that good stuff. Plus, we're part of a bigger community with the residents who live here at the Armed Forces Retirement Home. And so we did have to be conscious of all that. And that helped make it a more effective process. Again, because we were aware of that, we engaged them early on, and they were more like partners versus contrarians throughout the process. So I appreciated that. That was a surprise.
Yeah.
And it came in on time and on budget, which was another big surprise. To be honest, that's only happened in one other project I've worked on.
Gotcha. Thanks so much, Chuck. Nyamka, what's your perspective as the chief academic officer? And you kind of came in and out of the core planning group. You were part of the main design shred, also a part of some of the interviews with the teachers. What was surprising for you in the process?
I think one of the big surprises is that when you think about school, you automatically think about books. And being in this historic space, there weren't like a lot of bookshelves and things that were already incorporated in this space. And so we really wanted to be intentional about, presenting opportunities for students to just, walk down the hall and pick up a book. And so that was something that was really missing in our previous space and something that we really wanted to incorporate to just kind of show that, we don't want to feel that they have to go to this one space to get books or to continue their learning, but it's something that's throughout our space and easily accessible to all and inviting. And, they can visibly see the books that are there, not just the side of the book, so they can, wonder what it is, but the books are just kind of like jumping out to them. And that was something that is really exciting as you think about, opening opportunities for students to continue their learning. So that was something that we wanted and we were able to get it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, and Stephen, what's your perspective from like the meta level, thinking about your interactions with this project and then also how it compares to others?
I think what Chuck referred to as kind of the experts coming to do a school project, and those experts might be people such as ourselves, architects, engineers who have expertise in school planning and in construction processes, as well as the expertise of administration and honestly, even faculty sometimes. I think for me, what is maybe less surprising at this point, but was surprising to me at one point, was just how much very important knowledge resides with engaged communities that the experts such as ourselves just don't have. And I think that finding that appropriate balance where we're showing up together with school administrators and district folks as subject matter experts, but also recognizing that communities are truly the experts in their own daily lives, is really kind of the big learning for me. So one example of that I'd call a wonderful surprise, and this is actually an experience with DCPS as well. There was a school project we were involved with that, by all obvious indicators, was just a school project. This was a building that was built in the 1960s, not very exciting. It had deteriorated, it needed to be modernized. Okay, you just come in, you do a school project. In engaging with its community, kind of in the way that we're going to talk about today, what we learned is that the school site actually had an incredibly deep history going back to the time of the Civil War. And in that engagement and in that learning, this project became more than just, a modernized school building. It became a site with incredibly deep meaning that was expressed through an award-winning public art program that now the community and really anybody visiting the site will experience in a very, very different way. So that would be an example of a wonderful surprise that came out of truly engaging and respecting what people who had lived in a neighborhood for a long time brought to the table that we just didn't have access to prior.
Nice. So that kind of, go ahead, Naimka.
I was going to share another thing that found surprising is, when we were kind of doing the design charrettes, is, realizing how intentional, like you have to, or how so many factors that have to be considered as you're thinking about designing a space, and how intentional you have to be. And we thought it was important to kind of go back to our mission and think of what are the things that we want to, say about our space, and, thinking about that creative piece, and really kind of forced us to be intentional about the colors that we chose for the design, the furniture. We're all about, students being creative, and we didn't want to just have one set seating area for students. We wanted to kind of have this flexible seating where some students can sit on cushions, some can sit in a chair, you can stand. So having multiple options like that, whereas it didn't initially, have us think about that, but and through the design, really being intentional about what we wanted to create in this space, and then taking those designs, and these are the different things that we can do with that, was really fun and exciting to do.
Awesome. I was just gonna, obviously we set it up this way, but this transitions us nicely to our next question, which is, what do you all feel like were the most crucial discoveries that you made during both the Creative Minds process and other projects you've been involved in, not just as we were, doing the design and developing the building, but also, and we'll touch on this more heavily later, but, think a little bit at least about how it's been getting into the spaces and what you might be considering it as a post occupancy. And, especially given that the project was intended to set up a vision for the future, what were you discovering that set us up in the design process and then also going forward? I guess I have to pick somebody. Chuck, you look ready.
I was about to say you might want to go to Naimka first, but I'll jump in. I think it was, it was a really interesting time for us to do a design and a renovation, because we were also going through strategic planning. And the discoveries that came through both processes were so wonderfully aligned, which I think was a big surprise. But it was because of the process of both. And they kind of mirrored each other, and they're definitely walking in lockstep in parallel, that I felt like we got a really strong sense of vision. So one example, just a silly example, and Naimka alluded to this, we used to refer to ourselves as CMI. Now we call ourselves Creative Minds. And that's become the way our 8th grade president in his speech when he graduated said, the pandemic forced us to not just go to Creative Minds, but be Creative Minds. And so it's kind of taking hold. And I think because of the process, that allowed it to get a really good start. And so that was a really pleasant discovery for me, I think, just to sort of that's my first gut reaction.
I would say another discovery is just thinking about the color choices that we kind of went with, and how some colors cause you to have a little more excitement and elude or elicit different feelings in our students. And we oftentimes you see like super bright colors like the red, orange, yellow, green, and sometimes those can really get students excited. But like we want to kind of strike that balance between not overstimulating, because we also realize that if there's too many things happening in the classroom that causes distraction, and we really want to minimize that, but then also make the space feel bright and welcome. So trying to strike that balance between the design process there.
Yeah, and I was going to add, at being a part of the design team for this, I think the before and after pictures don't really give you what you think it is, but our deep dive into acoustics, we had an acoustic consultant for the project. He came and he walked with us. He was like, whoa, this is a wild building for a school. You've got 20-foot ceilings in some places and lots of hard surfaces. So I think that deep dive, the difference between walking down the hall before we did any work, and then now with the Tectum treatments and the resilient floor with acoustic underlay treatments, just it's wild. And I love that we always keep coming back to that. One of the forefront pieces for Creative Minds is inclusive education, and I just think that with the color choices and the material palette and that those really big changes in acoustic effectiveness, I think they're so exciting. And I think it's like a late discovery for me, because like it's kind of obviously you have an acoustic consultant and you do the things, but as we talked and we had the strategic plan and we were conversing about what do you really want for your students, I think that was something that we fell into deep diving that was a really excellent discovery that's going to be supporting like all the changes and work that you might do later. And then I wanted to touch back on what Chuck was saying in terms of overlapping with the strategic plan, Stephen. I think you've probably experienced that both ways a few times, that sometimes the strategic plan is happening and you try and integrate it. Sometimes it's happening and it's just a completely separate process. What do you think are the positives and negatives and discoveries that people might make by overlapping strategic planning and I guess almost strategic planning and design? Did we lose you, Stephen? Oh.
Was that a question for me? I think what I would say is kind of a continual discovery, if you will, for me, is just how much there is to learn. And so, when I think about the projects we've worked on where those processes overlap, I think one of the lessons I take from that is that it's kind of like the more people you speak to and the more voices you bring to the table, you're likely to only discover more things that will enrich your project and your process. And I think really the big lesson for me about communication generally is that sometimes I think we encounter a kind of fear of either giving communities, I don't know, too much voice. What might they demand if we allow them to speak? Or fear of kind of losing control of a process and not being able to maintain budgets and schedules. And really what I found, and really I think it's very beautiful, is that I do believe we've proven that it's possible to set and maintain parameters on all kinds of things: budget, schedule, educational delivery, whatever the parameters might be, and still give people a voice. And by doing that, you allow for these discoveries that can enrich, and also do what Chuck was referring to earlier, which is create a real sense of ownership. And so, the question here was, what is the crucial discovery? So this may be a little bit of an oddball thing, but my crucial discovery on our most recent project in Baltimore is that even the people who are very much opposed to the project and don't get what they want can still become supporters of the project, just because you've allowed them to engage, speak their piece, make their case, be treated with respect, and, have the response of, I hear you, and, because of these reasons, we really can't do what it is that you're asking for as an individual. So in the case of Baltimore, this one person I'm thinking of is just a very, very colorful and very loud character, not politically correct or polite in any sense of the word. And in the end, he was a friend. So that's my big discovery about engaging communities.
That's great. On the more specific side, Nyamka, I was thinking back when we did the design charrette and we were presenting the community engagement executive summary, and especially around talking to your staff and talking to your teachers about what they want and what they'd like and how they, the kind of spaces they'd like to see. And there was some surprise around the idea of like collaboration spaces and breakout spaces. So I was just wondering, there was a moment of surprise, but there were some things you've probably heard from your staff before. What are the conversations going on now? Like what are they maybe seeing when they're in these new spaces that they're enjoying or feel ownership in, or have ideas for how you could improve in the future?
Yeah, so we've had nothing but great feedback from the staff around the new spaces and everyone. We want the whole building to look like these identified spaces that we have started to embark on. I think a big takeaway was, being in this historic building, it wasn't designed for a school. And so it was like people would have to find like a closet to work with a student or to collaborate with a co-teacher. And now we have these very intentional spaces where they're out in the open. You're not kind of like hidden in a corner or something like that. You can be really intentional about meeting space. And then also, I think that also creates this kind of learning environment where the students can walk by and see teachers working together, collaborating, and kind of goes back to our personal goals where we're, want to create this collaborative spirit among our team, but then also showing that our teachers are still working together to learn and to ensure that they're planning engaging lessons for students. So I think that was exciting to be able to hear that from our teachers and then be able to deliver on that, which is going to help their practice, be, better educate our students. So that was exciting to see.
Thanks so much. Chuck, did you want to add anything to that before we move to our next question? Cool. So our next question, we've been talking a lot about internally, what did we discover? What was surprising to us? But what do you all think is most important for other people doing school design projects to ask and to know, so that they can find their authentic and emerging contexts and do successful projects for their specific situation? Chuck, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. It harkens back a lot on some of the themes that we've been talking about. We've talked a lot about context, we've talked about community, we've talked about process. In my experience, schools are most successful when they have a clear sense of who they are and how they want to work with kids and engage their community. And that, that doesn't mean there's one perfect model for every school. I happen to think Creative Minds is about as good as it can get, but I do think there's other schools that are effective by other measures. But it is that ability to identify that, to be able to state it, make it a shared belief, a shared context, and then you take sort of your view of where you're sitting, what it looks like, and who you're serving, and how does that impact sort of the kind of school you want to run and the kind of kids you're going to serve. And it becomes this beautiful melting pot into something that sounds like it'd be really messy, but it was actually really clear in the end. And I think a school has to be willing to get messy a little bit in order to find the order in the chaos. So there's an analogy I use all the time. It's like, I love jazz music. I love jazz music because you can always hear the melody in it, even though there's all the riffing going on around it. There's that central force that's guiding the song forward. And if you approach a school design project, and whether it's a strategic design project like we did, if you constantly keep that melody in there, you can let everybody riff around you. And each of that riffs is going to make the song a little bit better and a little bit more enjoyable for everybody. And they'll take ownership. So I think if I were to advise a school or a school district, or if I could go back in time and redo some of the buildings I've done before, I would say take a good look in the mirror and then invite other people into the room and then have a really open, transparent dialogue. It may take a little longer, but in the end, it's going to be a lot stronger.
Hmm.
And if you don't do that, it's just going to feel like school.
Hmm.
And, we don't have the best reputations. So do what you can to make it a place that welcomes people. So
Right.
that's the advice I give someone.
Nice. Namka, I'd love to hear your thoughts on both what Chuck said and also what your advice specifically might be to students and teachers that are engaging in this process, and also other people that are in a similar position to you with the chief academic officer just duties and looking at curriculum and trying to make a consistent central theme of maintaining it. What do you think is really key, both from what Chuck was saying for the overarching and the big picture, but also for students and teachers and people who are trying to manage the operations of the building day by day?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to engage the community because you want everyone to kind of have this buy-in. Not that you have to go with everyone's decision, but like allowing a space for them to kind of share the ideas. And then always keeping it kind of in line with what your mission and vision is for the school, because I think that is what kind of takes that piece out where it's not personal that we're not going the direction that you are suggesting, but it's more, this is how we're staying in line with what our vision and mission are. So keeping that kind of as a forefront, as the you can take all the suggestions, but keeping that as mind is, this is where we're trying to move forward towards, and we're going to consider all of these things, but our determining factors are going to go back to that very specific mission and driven. And I think that really keeps it kind of not judgmental. So it's like people don't have their feelings hurt when their idea is not considered, but not part of the plan.
Right, because it's transparent. That makes sense. I was gonna bounce to Stephen.
I was just going to say I want to come off what Nyamko was saying, that I think that there's some I think there's like a beautiful balance that can be achieved, on kind of one wrong end of the balance is saying, I can't hear what these other people might say because they're going to get me off track. The other side is, not being able to say, or not being able to filter between the ideas that are aligned with the bigger vision, and ones that have to be put to the side. But there's some beautiful balance where, on the one hand, you're able to take in all kinds of ideas and input and truly be open to it. Because, as professionals, I think sometimes we could come in with a kind of defensive posture, right? Here's the idea, here's the plan, here's the vision, or here's my color choices as an architect, or here's my concept design, and to want to defend that. And really, I've learned that there actually isn't a benefit to that, because at the end of the day, if somebody is bringing something to the table that really points out a deficiency in the approach you took, it's going to get better if you could really hear that. And or there's some idea, like the whole history of that school, that just wasn't present and was just beautiful. So truly kind of coming in with open ears, open mind, open heart, and being able to say, wow, that's such important information. Thank you so much for bringing that to the table and allowing it to impact our thinking. And at the same time, as Nyamko said, being able to also say, I hear you, but that idea doesn't really find a place in what it is that we're trying to do here, or it's going to prevent us from accomplishing the broader aim. And that would be, I guess, my advice to anyone engaging in this is find that balance, come in with an open heart, also kind of know what your direction is, and somehow walk that narrow path.
Yeah, just to build a little bit off of what Stephen said, because a lot of those themes resonated with me as I reflect back on the process. And I keep using the word process, but that's critically important, because you do develop that vision of what it can be, what it should look like. You get the community's input into that. That becomes your filter or your lens through which you make all your decisions. And I think you used the word filter, Stephen. And that's sort of what I heard coming through what Nyamka was saying too, is, well, here's what we decided CMI is as a group, and here's why we picked these colors instead of these colors. That's a really great idea. And it's a really great idea as I look through it, the lens of the vision that we just came up with. And if you can tie back to that, it's more like glue. It pulls it together. It creates that sense of ownership you mentioned, Rachel, where there isn't a lot of pushback. In fact, there's a lot of push forward. I think we actually used that term way early in the process or something like that, like how to push this forward in a good way to turn people from holding us back to pushing us forward, or all rowing in the same direction. One of our directors uses that for analogy quite a bit with me. But I think the advice again, and that's the right way to frame this question, is the advice is do the dang process. It's important. It really is important. And it gives you credibility. It gives you the ability to make decisions versus finances driving your decision. It actually, if you have to look at cost savings, then you can judge not just on this is cheaper, that's cheaper, but what's more in line with our vision. And if you don't have that, it's becomes an administrative process versus an educational process.
I mean, I would argue that sometimes when, as you said, Chuck, the finances are driving it, sometimes it's not actually finances in a broad sense, it's the short-term finances. Because I would argue that a school project that has a firm foundation in an engaged community and that ownership is something that probably has longevity to it. And sometimes projects that are pushed forward to get it done without that foundation, maybe the price paid today seems less, but they're likely to need something else much sooner. In some way, what you have is just not going to reflect what's needed, and I think we'll encounter some form of obsolescence. It may not fall down, it may be technically fine, but if it doesn't respond to what the context is, it's in one way or another kind of not gonna last. There was one thing I wanted to add is that I think that this kind of lesson, the central lesson that I learned, which is like that projects really become better and are enriched by this kind of input. I think that's an easier balance to maintain when the input you're getting is fundamentally positive or feels good. Like this history of that school site in DC, and that was just like great new information. What a wonderful thing to hear and to learn about. Sometimes the input is what you just presented to us is terrible, and this is why. And sometimes that's wrong, it's misinformed or whatever, but sometimes it's actually right. And at the end of the day, no matter how hard that is to take as a creative person and as a professional, if the project had gone ahead in that wrong way, it would not have been a good thing in the long term. And that happened on that project in Baltimore. We had a scheme for how the project site was going to accept deliveries coming through certain streets in the neighborhood that made all the sense in the world from a technical and planning point of view. Traffic studies, the way this complicated building had to be organized, utilities, you name it. That was the right answer, it seemed to us. And we showed it to the community, and their reaction was, at the level of, we are going to lay down in front of the bulldozers. You cannot bring trucks through that street. You don't understand how the life of this community works, so you're not taking that into account. It was hard to hear, hard for us to hear, hard for our client to hear, and to do something different was actually going to cost more money. But it was necessary. In the end, it was necessary. And again, that's maybe the hardest thing of all, to be able to actually hear that and say, wow, someone came to the table with some good information that we just didn't have. And it kind of sends us back to the drawing board. But that's actually in the benefit of the project, of the community, of this school, and is going to give it that longevity and ownership that it otherwise would not have had.
Chuck and Imka, is there something maybe in the design process or maybe just in the process of, developing the school and pushing forward your vision? Is there something like that you've experienced around, not having information and getting something that means, oh gosh, we need to like really restructure this piece or that piece? Either of you.
I think we've experienced that. Like I said, the renovation completed right before we went into the pandemic, and we've only had, we haven't brought all of our students back into this space, so we've only brought a small number. So far we haven't experienced anything like that. We'll have to wait until the fall when we bring everyone back in to see if there's some things that, we didn't consider with having more students and staff into the space. But for right now, we haven't noticed anything.
Yeah, I would say not on this project where we had to make sort of got some new information, make a hard left-hand turn.
Mm.
But in past experience with the school that I won't name, but they came into a neighborhood in an area we call East End now. It's east of the river in Anacostia, with a very high-paid consultant who has a good name in the community, or at least in parts of the community, who came in and said, "We're going to give you this brand new school. It's going to be amazing." And as Stephen was talking, I was having flashbacks because I was running a school at the time just down the block from this particular project. And that the community there, the school was a national school that was putting in a school here. Didn't hear it the way they needed to hear it, the way that Stephen and Sons Like Newman heard it up in Baltimore. And the community stopped the school they literally did stand in front of the bulldozers. They thought, oh, we got this high-paid quasi celebrity guy coming in and pitching this to, oh, we're going to make this a better community. It's going to be safer. It's going to be good school in your community. And folks are like, you have no idea what we want. You have no idea what we need. And they stopped it. It stopped for a full year, and they had to come back. They ended up getting a new firm to come in and sort of handle PR and engage the community for 6 months before they decided to break ground. Totally had to restart. So I've seen those kind of things happen, which was one of the reasons why when you described the process here, knowing I have a very strong, empowered cohort of parents here. It ranges from people who just give us their kids and they don't want them back until the end of the day, to others that want to tell the teachers what to wear to work. And it's a balancing act, but we knew that we had to engage those folks again through that lens of, this is what the school is about. This is our North Star. This is how we're going to educate kids. Great ideas doesn't fit. Great ideas fits great idea, new learning. And by doing that, it changed the process to, like Nyamka said, it's been, knock on wood, smooth sailing. Everybody's come in and says, oh, it's beautiful. This is so much better. It feels so much better than it used to feel down here. Everybody uses the word feel when they walk into the building, which I think is amazing. People don't walk into schools and say, it feels good in here. They're like, now I've got to start doing my 3 R's. Here, they're like, this is fun. Like, this feels good. And that's a big change. So yeah, that's my example.
That's great. So that transitions us really easily into our last question, which is, we've talked about what the kind of your context were as we started design, as we were moving through construction, but what are you looking at, in the future? What do you think are things that might emerge or things that might get more important as we're moving forward? Obviously, a part of that conversation is, how has the pandemic been affecting you all, and how do you think it's going to be affecting you next year? But I'm sure, like, given the depth of a holistic look at all of this that you all have been sharing so far, I'm sure you have things that are beyond the pandemic and, maybe even spurred on by experiences that we've had in the last year. Nyamka, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we have brought some of our students back, some of our students who weren't finding success with distance learning, but in the fall, we plan to bring everyone back. Some of our students wouldn't have been in school for over a year, which a year and a half, and really thinking about how we're going to be ready for them when they come, and really being intentional about we first need to ensure that from a social emotional perspective that they're ready for learning, and thinking about how our classrooms are set up, how we're going to be welcoming them, who are they going to see when they first get out of the car or walk onto campus, like being really intentional about how we're welcoming students back. And I think that goes back to the environment and really setting our students up for success when they come back into the building, so that they know they feel welcome, they feel loved, and so that they'll be available for learning. So really being intentional about how we're welcoming them back, so that they can really dive into that learning that we're excited to continue.
Yeah, building off of what Nyamka said, there was a lot of intentional talks and conversations about what's it going to look like when they come back, but also and all that was, how are they going to engage? That's what I heard Nyamka saying, was how are we going to get the kids the ability, remove barriers for engagement, encourage engagement, right? We had to do that during the pandemic as well, where the learning environment was not something we could control, but there were barriers as a school we could try to remove so kids could be more engaged. So food, we learned in the pandemic that a large number of our kids and families depend on 2 square meals a day for school, and suddenly they're stuck at home and they're short 2/3 of their meals every day. So we quickly rallied to create a food delivery program for free. And what that did was, it suddenly folks weren't having to scramble to find food. They were able to eat and engage in the online learning that we were doing. That same kind of process we went through as we were planning the renovation is kind of the same process we went through as we were identifying those basic needs, and how we identified which students to bring back. So again, process is critically important. To identify the students came back, we did a lot of deep data dives into attendance and normative scores and summative scores and teacher observations, had a lot of conversations and arguably charrettes about it, prioritizing kids. We color coded kids based on their engagement, and who needed to come back. And by doing that, the kids who were least engaged came back first. So that'll build that culture of engagement that Nyamka was talking about. We removed that barrier. We had them bring their siblings back, so it was a family experience. We were very intentional about making sure kids met all the teachers at their grade level. So when they were invited back, they may be with a teacher, one of 3 teachers at their grade level, but they know all of them because they're, so that kind of intentional aspect of this process was really important. And I think a lesson we pulled out of the design process and applied to our thinking and our planning going forward. It'll be great to see people in the space and to see how they engage in the space and engage in learning in the space. We've been using these spaces, the renovated spaces, primarily for kids to come back, but they've been across grade bands. So we'll have big kids with little kids and all that. So when there's that sort of, this is my classroom, I think it's going to be really fun to see. But I think if we're always focused on the kind of education our kids deserve, the way we want to engage the community in that and remove barriers to accessing education as an inclusive environment, because that's what an inclusive environment is. It includes, there's a reason why that's the first word, the root word. So if you do that now, even in the pandemic, you will continue to do it going forward. And so we've had to be very intentional as a leadership team to talk about 5 years down the road, as well as 5 months down the road, as well as 5 minutes from now. Because 5 minutes from now, one of the variants may take off and we have to shut everything down. And what's our plan for that? 5 months from now, we may be able to bring back 50% of our kids. 5 years from now, we may want to add a high school. Who knows? So having those intentional conversations and a process around it has been some of the learning I think we've taken away from this project. So thank you all for that.
It's our pleasure. To wrap off this panel bit, Stephen, I just wanted to see if there was anything you wanted to add in terms of what you consistently see, or some of the surprises that you might be seeing as buildings are opened, and as not just with the pandemic, but as buildings are opened after construction, and then also maybe talk about some of the conversations that you've had with others about how their reopening processes after the pandemic are going.
You know, I had an issue with my car a few months ago, and when I brought it to my mechanic, he told me, you know, they're seeing an entirely different set of problems with vehicles than they've ever had, because the kinds of problems that cars begin to develop when they sit around unused for months is very, very different than the kinds of problems that they have because of use. So I kind of think buildings are the same story. Whether they're buildings that we have some buildings in our practice that opened just before the pandemic, you know, and typically the first year of use going through its first cycle of seasons is when issues are discovered and corrected, and then the building kind of goes into its operational mode. And buildings that were completed either just before the pandemic or during the pandemic simply didn't have that. And so that's one issue, just the lack of ability to shake out problems in use. The other is that some of them have actually developed problems from not being used, just like the cars. So I think that's a new experience for any of us, you know, for us as professionals, for our clients, of how to deal with those new kinds of problems. And certainly the hope is, as we ease back into more normal operations, that will be a thing of the past. On the other hand, as Chuck said, if this becomes something that does happen, you know, with any regularity, perhaps we need to start thinking about, you know, processes for buildings that are not occupied, so that they don't develop these new kinds of issues. I would say the other thing about the pandemic experience really does have to do with how one engages with communities. How do you reach communities? How do you bring people together? And the honest truth is that those were always present, just not everybody realizes them. I mean, they're, you know, even in situations where we want to be inclusive, there are important voices that are difficult to get in the room because they're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, they don't have childcare. And then, of course, we tend to turn toward digital tools, and some people don't have access to the digital tools. So I think kind of those practical issues of how do you actually bring people together in a room became very pointed during the pandemic, because we couldn't bring people together. But the truth of the matter is they've always been present. And I don't know, I think it's encouraging in some ways to see some of the innovative tools that kind of came to the fore during the pandemic. And my hope is that that will enable some greater diversity and engagement, and ability to bring in a broad range of voices in our community engagement.
Absolutely. I love I've been through a couple of intensive community engagement processes during the pandemic, and I love the new skills that everybody has in their ability to get on a call and talk with everyone, and you know, all of these new tools that rolled out, like Mural and, you know, Whiteboard and such. So I really appreciate you all's time. I have a few more pretty pictures to wrap us out. So I'm going to share my screen, and then right at the end, we've got our self-guided workshop. There is a survey link, and everyone will be receiving the slides as part of the package whenever you go to sign up for your session, or whenever, like after you sign up for your sessions, it'll be coming to you. But I do also have the questions right at the end. They're a repeat of some of the questions we asked here, but also a few others. So I'm going to just put on my shared screen. I'm going to say thank you and bye to everybody, because we're not going to see them again in the big format. This was really fun. You guys make it so easy to moderate. I'm just like, all right, here's the question. go connect, make creative connections with each other easily. So this has been really fun for me too. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up, like I said, with a few more slides. So one of the primary pieces that we had to take into account, like we said, was these historic conditions. So I thought everyone might want to see some of the details of the interiors and the exteriors of the building. Like Chuck mentioned, this is on the AFRH campus in DC. And I've got a couple more before and afters. This is the hallway off of the core learning commons space. So it's an activated hallway with some activity zones put out. And as you can see, lots and lots of acoustic treatments, but done in a fun and kind of area defining way. One of the big conversations we had throughout the design process was how the teachers and staff and students wanted to be out and about and doing things, but that it felt like maybe there was not enough structure for that. So that a lot of the moves that we made were creating spaces for different kinds of activities. An example, this is in the main hallway going down between the north and south ends of the building. And we just have a couple of pictures. We had done a bit of studies around how practices were changing during COVID-19. So we had on the left side the setup for the students who were in school, and then on the right side was the design setup. And I did want to mention, we've been talking all through this about being on budget, being on time, and how to make things flexible without exploding. And I think a really big part of that process was the furniture design process, which we went through as an initial phase, and then we set the team up with A2S, and they went through a furniture shredding phase of their own. And they'd like to see this model continue throughout the rest of the school as we go forward. So here is the SurveyMonkey link. Like I said, it will be in the slides that you'll have access to as a part of watching this session. And here are our self-guided workshop questions. And I'm just going to leave them up for a second. So if anybody wants to snip them and is not going to go to the survey link, they'll have the option. And then I'll stop my share and we will wrap up. Thanks, everybody. Bye.